The first box was tucked into an alcove in the brickwork about 40 meters from the access shaft. I almost missed it. My head torch caught the edge of the plastic, a clear storage container, the kind you'll buy from Wilco, sitting in a maintenance niche that hadn't been used since the Victorians built it. It was clean, not a spot of sewage on it, not a film of condensation. Down here, everything is slick, everything is coated, everything rots. This box looked like someone had placed it there that morning. I opened the lid and inside was a woman's wristwatch, a student ID card, a mobile phone with a cracked screen, and a set of house keys on a key ring with a name engraved into the metal. I'm Daniel. I was 33 when this happened, 6 months into a separation, sleeping on my brother's sofa in Stratford while I figured things out. I'd been volunteering for every early morning job Thames Water had because being underground at 6 AM was better than lying awake in someone else's living room. I was a maintenance engineer on the intersecting sewer network beneath central London. Unless you've been down there, you can't understand what that means, so let me explain it. Beneath your feet, right now, there are over 2,000 kilometers of brick-lined tunnels built in the 1860s by a name called Joseph Balsaghetti. They carry everything: rainwater, sewage, surface runoff, from every building in the city to the treatment works east of the Thames. The main intersecting sewers are the big ones, cathedral-sized brick arches, some of them 4 meters wide, running in straight lines for miles under streets you walk on every day. They are restricted, completely. You cannot enter them without a confined space permit, a gas monitor, a harness, an emergency breathing apparatus, and a sign-off from the supervising engineer. No civilian has legal access, no civilian has ever been invited. They are, for all practical purposes, as inaccessible as any place in Britain. I've been in the tunnels hundreds of times. You get used to the smell. It's not what you'd expect. It's not toilet. It's hot, biological, a thick chemical fudge that sits in your throat like warm dish water. You get used to the sound, the low rushing of water, the echo of your own breath bouncing off brickwork that's been down here for 160 years. What you never get used to is the darkness. Your head torch gives you a cone of maybe 15 meters. Beyond that, nothing, and the tunnels stretch for miles in every direction. I was sent on a routine CCTV survey of a disused storm overflow chamber beneath the square in the City of London. Standard job: go down, set up the camera, come up. Should have taken about 2 hours. I descended the access shaft at 6 AM before the streets above got busy. The shaft was about 12 meters deep, a vertical steel-rung ladder bolted into the concrete sleeve. At the bottom, the tunnel opened up, the original Balsaghetti brickwork, beautiful even now, the herringbone pattern spiralling overhead like the inside of a wine barrel. The water was ankle deep, slow-moving, dark. The air was warm and close and smelled of iron and fat and something sweet that you learned to stop identifying. The overflow chamber was 300 meters east. I walked the tunnel alone, my boots splashing in the shallow flow, the beam of my torch catching the curved walls and the occasional cable bolted to the ceiling. Every 50 meters or so there's a maintenance niche, a recess in the brickwork, about 1 meter deep and 1 meter wide. Originally it was built for lamp hooks and tool storage. Most of them are empty. Some have old ironwork rusted into the brick. You don't look at them, you walk past them. I set up my camera rig in the overflow chamber and started the survey. The chamber was dry, it only fills during heavy rainfall, and the brick floor was coated in fine silt that hadn't been disturbed in months. Standard. I ran the CCTV head along the walls and ceiling, checking for cracks, It was on the return pass that my torch caught the edge of the plastic. I walked over to the niche. The box was sitting on the ledge about waist height, clear plastic, clip-on lid, completely clean. I didn't touch it at first, I just looked at it. Nothing down here is clean, nothing down here is dry, nothing down here is placed. Everything is washed in, caught, trapped. This box had been deliberately put there by someone who had come down the same shaft as I had. I opened it. Inside, a woman's silver wristwatch, face cracked, a university student ID card, a young woman's photo, a name I won't repeat, issued 3 years earlier, a Samsung phone, screen shattered, powered off, and a set of house keys on a plain metal keyring with a first name engraved into it. The name on the keyring didn't match the name on the ID card. I closed the lid and I stepped back. My torch swept left along the tunnel wall. 10 meters further, another niche, another box, same type, same size, same impossible cleanliness. I walked to it and I opened it. Different items, a pair of reading glasses, a small leather wallet containing an oyster and library card, a single earring, a hair tie with strands of dark hair still wound around it. I looked up. My torch found a third niche, another box. I walked the length of that tunnel wall and I counted 7 boxes, 7 niches, 7 sealed containers, each one placed at the same height, evenly spaced, stretching in a line along the brickwork like a display, like a shelf, like someone had arranged them to be looked at. They were ordered. I could tell because the items inside downgraded in condition from left to right. The first box held items that were yellowed, faded, the ID card laminate peeling. The 7th held items that could have been taken yesterday. I opened every one. Each box contained a different woman's belongings, a watch, keys, glasses, ID, small personal effects, the kind of things you'll carry in a handbag, the kind of things that disappear when a person disappears. Nothing valuable enough to pawn, nothing useful enough to keep, just the proof that someone existed. And every box smelled wrong. Down here, everything smells of the same thing. Sewage, fat, wet brick, rust. But when I opened the lids, there was something else, faint but unmistakable. Perfume, different in each box, floral in one, something sharp and citrus in another, as though the person who collected these things had sealed them quickly, trapping the last trace of the woman who owned them. The smell of a person, preserved in a plastic box, 100 feet beneath a city that had forgotten she existed. The 7th box was different. It held a newer phone, an iPhone, the screen intact, powered off, a travel card, a silver ring, and nested inside the box, beneath the items, was an 8th container, smaller, still wrapped in its original cellophane packaging, empty, unused, waiting. I stood in that tunnel for a long time, the sound of the water behind me, the hum of the city above me. Thousands of people walking over my head without knowing what was beneath them. I looked at the 7 boxes and I understood what I was looking at. Not a collection of lost property, not something washed in. Trophies. And the 8th box meant he hadn't finished. I didn't touch anything else. I left the camera rig where it was. I climbed the shaft and I called my supervisor from the street. He called the police. The tunnel was sealed within hours. Over the following weeks, I learned through a colleague on the forensic liaison team that belongings in the 7 boxes had matched the 7 missing person cases spanning 12 years. All women, all reported missing within a 1-mile radius of the access shaft above them. None of them have ever been found. The boxes were arranged chronologically, oldest on the left, Newest on the right, the most recent box belonged to a woman who had been missing for 3 weeks. The police never released the findings publicly. The access shaft was welded shut and a new one was bored 50 meters east. The original location was paved over. I was told that no human remains were recovered from the tunnel, but the 8th box, the empty one, still in its cellophane, told me everything the police didn't. Whoever put that there was planning to come back. That was beneath London, 2,000 kilometers of tunnels and one man who knew them better than the people paid to maintain them. The next story goes deeper. The words were scratched into the concrete in overlapping lines, dozens of them, carved with something sharp. A nail, a screw, the edge of a belt buckle. The same 2 words, repeated over and over until they filled the entire wall from floor to ceiling. Still here, still here, still here. Some of the scratches were old, pale, smoothed by dust, the edges softened. Some of them were fresh, clean grooves in grey concrete, the powder still sitting in the cuts, and in the centre of the room, bolted to the floor, was a steel chair with leather restraints on both arms and both legs. The leather was cracked, but the buckles had been oiled. My name's Chris. I was 37, a chartered structural engineer with a daughter who just turned 6, the same age, as I later realised, as the Burlington complex itself when it was finally decommissioned. I was subcontracted by the Ministry of Defence to carry out a water ingress assessment in a sealed section of the CORSHAM tunnel networks in Wiltshire. If you haven't heard of CORSHAM, here's what you need to know. Beneath the countryside outside the town of CORSHAM lies one of the largest underground complexes in Europe. 35 acres of tunnels, corridors, dormitories, kitchens and operational rooms, dug out of an old Bath stone quarry and converted in the 1950s into a nuclear bunker for the entire British government. Code name, Burlington. It was designed to house 4,000 people, the Prime Minister, senior civil servants, military commanders, for up to 3 months in the event of a nuclear strike. It had its own water supply, its own power station, its own telephone exchange, 60 miles of external road, and a BBC broadcasting studio for post-attack communications. It was decommissioned in 2004 and declassified shortly after, but the site remains Ministry of Defence property. Access is strictly restricted. No public tours, no civilian entry. You need military escort and written authorization to set foot inside. I was escorted to level 3, one of the lower dormitory sections that hadn't been formally inspected since the early 1990s. The corridors were wide, painted institutional green, lit by cage bulbs every 20 meters. The air was cool, still, and dry in a way that felt artificial, like standing inside a sealed container. My escort, a young Ministry of Defence liaison officer, walked me to the entrance of a subsection designated L3 South and told me he'll be back in 2 hours. He handed me a torch, pointed down the corridor, and left. The first thing I noticed was the dust. CORSHAM is in a stone quarry. The walls are raw Bath stone, the ceiling is raw stone, and over decades the surface dreads of fine white powder that settles on everything. 30 years of undisturbed accumulation. The floor was coated in it, a soft, pale layer, almost like flour, completely uniform. The bunks along the wall were layered in it. The blankets, folded and stacked, were white with it. The overhead pipes and cable runs were furred. It was like walking through a room sealed in ash. The dormitory block was standard, 2 rows of metal-framed bunks, 12 per row, a central walkway between them, communal washrooms at the far end. I was there to inspect the ceiling for water damage, so I walked the length of the block, shining my torch upward, looking for staining, cracks, the usual signs of ingress from the surface 120 feet above. I've done hundreds of surveys in old buildings, but I've never had the feeling that a building was aware of me. This was one. The silence wasn't empty. It was held, like the air was waiting to see what I'll do next. It was on my return walk that I looked down. The dust on the floor had been disturbed. Not everywhere, just a narrow track about a boot width wide, running along the left side of the dormitory from the entrance to the far end. Someone had walked this corridor. The prints were soft-edged, partially filled in. Not fresh, but not decades old either. A few years at most. They followed the wall precisely, staying close to the bunks, as if the person had been trying to minimize their footprint. I followed them. They led past the washrooms, past the utility cupboard, to a fire door at the end of the block marked Services, No Access. The door was closed but not locked. The handle was clean. The dust had been wiped from it. I pushed it open. Behind it, a narrow corridor ran for about 15 meters and ended at a utility room. Pipes, junction boxes, an old ventilation unit mounted on the wall. The vent cover had been removed. Behind it, the shaft had been widened. Not by corrosion, the edges were clean. Tall marks, chisel or cold chisel, systematic, precise. The concrete surround had been chipped away to create an opening wide enough for a person to fit through. Beyond the opening, I could see a steel ladder, newer than anything else in the building, bolted into the shaft wall with ruled plugs that still had masonry dust on them. It ascended into darkness. My torch beam reached about 5 meters down before the shaft turned and I lost the angle. I should have stopped there. I should have gone back to the entrance and waited for my escort. I didn't. The ladder dropped about 4 meters into a chamber that was not on my survey plans, not on the original Burlington blueprints, not on the Ministry of Defence schematic I'd been given. It was small, roughly 3 meters by 4, and the walls were raw quarry stone on 3 sides. The 4th wall was concrete, poured later, a partition. The first thing I noticed was the sound, a low, mechanical hum, barely audible, felt more than heard, vibrating faintly through the ladder rungs and into my palms as I stepped off the last one. A ventilation fan, mounted in the ceiling, still running. Someone had wired it to the power source I couldn't see. Air was moving in this room. It was being maintained. The walls were covered in acoustic foam panels, the kind you'll buy from a music shop, glued to every surface, floor to ceiling. Some had peeled away at the edges, others were firmly fixed. The foam covered the concrete partition entirely. No sound from this room would carry into the corridor above. No sound from this room would reach the surface. In the centre of the room, a steel chair was bolted to the floor with 4 heavy-duty coach bolts. The seat was metal. The arms had leather straps with buckle fastenings, the kind used for medical restraint. The leather was old, cracked along the creases where wrists would press against it. But the buckles were bright, oiled, maintained. The legs of the chair had matching straps at ankle height. A bucket sat in the corner, stained, and the air carried something beneath the hum, faint, chemical, antiseptic, like a room that had been cleaned with bleach, not once, repeatedly. And on the wall behind the chair, the concrete partition, the words, "Still here." They were scratched into the surface in lines so dense they overlapped, dozens of repetitions layered on top of each other, some deep, some shallow, some in neat rows, some scrawled at angles. The letters filled the wall from about knee height to just above head height, the range of motion of a person seated and restrained. Some of the scratches were pale and smooth, old. Some were clean and sharp, recent. I took photographs. I climbed the ladder. I walked back to the dormitory and I sat at the entrance of L3 South and I waited for my escort without moving. I showed the photographs to the liaison officer. He made a phone call. 20 minutes later, 2 men in civilian clothes arrived and asked me to hand over my phone and my camera. I refused. They told me my survey was concluded and my contract was terminated effective immediately. I was driven to a building on the CORSHAM site and asked to sign a non-disclosure agreement under the Official Secrets Act. I was told the photographs were a matter of national security. I asked how a chair with restraints in a room that didn't exist is a matter of national security. No one answered. I signed the NDA. I received a follow-up report. I never received an explanation. 6 months later, I read in a local paper that a section of the CORSHAM tunnel network had been permanently filled with concrete. No reason given. The section wasn't named, but I recognised the L3 designation in the planning reference. Whatever was in that room, they didn't investigate. They buried it. That was 120 feet underground in a bunker designed to protect the British government. The next place is above ground, open to the sky, and it's the most dangerous of all. Under the floorboards of the farmhouse I found the room. Someone had dug it out by hand. The walls were lined with tarpaulin. The floor was bare earth, and a car battery powered a small computer fan wired to a length of dryer hose that ran up through the boards. Inside the room was a sleeping bag, a chemical toilet, a torch, and a plastic crate. I opened the crate and I found zip ties, duct tape, a roll of cling film, and a printed list. 12 names, all women. Next to each name was a physical description, an estimated age, and a single word in capital letters: alone. The list was dated for the next Imber open day. I'm Mark. I was 41 when this happened, 3 months into my warden job after being made redundant from a logistics company in Swindon. My wife said I'd taken the first thing that came along because I couldn't sit still. She was right, but the money was decent and I liked being outside. And after 18 years in the warehouse, the idea of walking open countryside for a living felt like freedom. I was a civilian range warden contracted to the Ministry of Defence on the Salisbury Plain training area in Wiltshire. My job was to patrol the restricted zones around the live fire ranges, checking for trespassers, monitoring unexploded ordnance markers, and ensuring public rights of way were cleared during non-firing periods. If you don't know, Salisbury Plain is the largest military training area in the United Kingdom. Nearly 100,000 acres of open grassland in the middle of Wiltshire, most of it completely closed to the public. Red flags fly when live firing is taking place. The ground is littered with unexploded ordnance from a century of artillery practice. There are signs every 50 meters. Danger, military firing range, keep out, no entry. And in the centre of it all, there's a village. Imber was evacuated in 1943. The army gave the residents 47 days to leave so the area could be used to train American troops for the D-Day landings. They were told they'd come back after the war. They never did. The village is still there. St. Giles Church with its 13th century tower. The shell of the Bell Inn with the date 1769 still visible on the gable. Rows of concrete buildings the army added in the 1970s for urban warfare training. Empty windows, no roofs, no doors, no glass, just open shells standing on open grass in the middle of a live fire zone. The public is allowed in on a handful of days per year, usually around Christmas and Easter. Hundreds of people drive in on a single approved road, walk the village, visit the church, and leave. The rest of the year, Imber is forbidden. I patrolled it alone, usually at dawn and dusk, usually when the light was low and the plain was empty. In October, I found tyre tracks. They were off the approved road, about 2 miles east of the village, cutting across the grass in the restricted impact zone. Not military vehicles, the tread was civilian, a standard road tyre, and the tracks were narrow, consistent with a car or a small van. They led through a gap in a wire fence that had been cut and bent back, and continued for about half a mile across open ground to a stone farmhouse on the edge of the village. Not one of the concrete training buildings, an original structure, one of the few that still has partial walls and a roof section. Most visitors don't know it's there. I passed it on patrols, but I'd never gone inside. It was outside the approved walking area and surrounded by UXO markers. I followed the tracks to the building. The door, or what was left of it, had been propped open with a breeze block. Inside, the ground floor was a single room, the ceiling partially collapsed, stone walls streaked with damp, and against the far wall, a camping stove, 2 jerry cans of water, tinned food stacked in a crate, a sleeping bag rolled up on a foam mat, and a laptop connected to a power bank. The laptop was open. The screen was still on. I looked at it. The browser had dozens of tabs open. Satellite imagery of the village from Google Earth. The Ministry of Defense published firing schedule for the plane. The specific dates and times when live firing would take place and when it wouldn't. A calendar of IMBA's public access open days, downloaded from the Wiltshire Council website. And a series of screenshots from Facebook and Instagram, posts from people who visited previous open days, geotagged photos, check-ins, selfies outside St Giles Church. Someone had been living inside the restricted zone, timing their presence around the firing schedule, moving when the ranges were cold, staying invisible when they were hot. The cut fence, the hidden car, the concealed farmhouse, they'd built a system, and the browser history told me they'd been researching the open days, not to avoid them, but to plan around them. I radioed my supervisor. He told me to stay put and not touch anything. I stepped back from the laptop and moved towards the door. That's when I felt it. The flagstone beneath my right boot was hollow. Not cracked, hollow. It rocked when I shifted my weight, and the edge was sitting higher than the others, with fresh soil packed into the gaps around it. It had been lifted recently and replaced in a hurry. I crouched down and worked my fingers under the edge. The flagstone came up. The air that rose from the void was warm. That's the detail I come back to. It was October. The farmhouse was cold, the stone walls were damp, and the air coming up from beneath the floor was warm. Someone had been down there recently, within hours. The void was roughly 2 meters long, a meter wide, and a meter deep. Someone had dug it out by hand. The walls were lined with blue tarpaulin, stapled to timber battens driven into the earth. The floor was packed soil. A car battery sat in one corner, wired to a small computer fan and the length of a white dryer hose that ran upwards through a gap in the floorboards. A ventilation system. Whoever had built this room expected to be in it with the flagstone sealed above them. Inside was a sleeping bag, folded flat, a chemical toilet, unused but assembled, a torch, a bottle of water, and a plastic storage crate with a clip-on lid. I opened the crate. Inside, a pack of heavy-duty cable ties, a roll of silver duct tape, a roll of cling film, a pair of latex gloves, still in the packet, and a sheet of A4 paper, printed, laminated, folded in half. I unfolded it. It was a list, 12 names, all women's names, each with a physical description beside it. Height, build, hair colour, approximate age. Next to each description was a note, the time they arrived on the most recent open day, which part of the village they walked to, whether they'd come alone or with others. 7 of the 12 had the word alone written in capitals beside them. At the bottom of the list, in handwriting, was a date. the date of the next scheduled Imber Open Day, 6 weeks away. And in the top corner, circled in red ink, was a name I recognised. A woman who'd been reported missing 2 days after the last open day. Her description on the list read, blue coat, arrived 11:40, walked east past the church, alone. She was still missing. I put the list back, I replaced the flagged stone, I walked outside and stood in the empty doorway and looked across Salisbury Plain. Miles of nothing in every direction, not a single other person visible, and I understood that the warm air rising from that hole meant he could still be on the plain, right now, watching me. The police arrived within the hour, not Wiltshire police, plain clothes, unmarked vehicles, a forensic team in a windowless van. They sealed the farmhouse, they sealed the impact zone, they told me to give a statement and leave the site. 3 weeks later, through my Ministry of Defence supervisor, I was told an individual had been identified and arrested. No name, no charge sheet, no news report. The arrest was never made public. The next scheduled open day was quietly postponed. When it was eventually rescheduled, I noticed new CCTV cameras on the approach road, and the farmhouse had been demolished, flattened, cleared to the foundations and covered with topsoil. But the plain is 100,000 acres, and there are other buildings there.